when you have a problem, the best way to solve it is to enlarge it. Why? Because if you enlarge the problem, you have more stakeholders interested in its resolution, more commitment. And also there are more trade-offs.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age, from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hi, my name is Simon Brown. I'm one of the co-authors of the book The Curious Advantage, and today I'm here with my co-author Paul Ashcroft.
Hello.
And unfortunately, Garrett can't be with us today, but we're delighted to be joined by the former Prime Minister of Portugal and the 11th President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, José. So welcome. Great to have you on the podcast. So, José, when we last spoke, you were describing to me how curiosity played a critical role in your career. So I'd love to hear more about how it all began.
It began when I was a child. Specifically, my best recollection was around, let's say, 13 years old, when I wanted to understand what's going on, namely in my country, because Portugal was an authoritarian regime. And we had the democratic revolution in 74. So 74, I just turned 18. So until my 18 years old, I was living in an authoritarian regime, very conservative, reactionary regime where there was no political freedom, no freedom of expression or freedom of meeting and political freedom. On the other civil liberties, there were civil liberties, but not really on the political area. And so I wanted to read what was forbidden. That's why, by the way, I became very radical against the regime. Precisely, it was the forbidden fruit. But I will say that the basic driver for my curiosity was to understand how my country was, how it compared with others, why we had not freedom. And that was what pushed me, by the way, for politics. Some people are pushed for politics, I think, more for some, let's say, cause. It can be ideological or other kind of stimulus. In my case, I would say it was curiosity. It was to try to understand why we were different from others, why we were different from the UK, or from France, or from the US. At that time, by the way, Spain and Southern Europe, they were all authoritarian regimes. So that was basically it was curiosity. It was the most important driver, I would say, for my political engagement later.
And José, you've managed to keep your curiosity, it seems, going throughout your career. You've had such a varied and fascinating career. How have you done that? How have you stayed curious throughout your life?
I find it absolutely natural. We are in this world. We don't know exactly why we are here and what for, and how is the world outside. So I wanted to understand. I think it's quite natural. Very young, I wanted to learn several languages. I think, by the way, the issue of language is extremely important. That, to be honest, in the Portuguese authoritarian regime, we were learning more languages than today. Today, people only learn English besides the mother tongue. But then in my, let's say, high school studies or secondary schools, I learned besides Latin, French, English, and German. And so this was helpful. But afterwards, I wanted always to try to understand what's going on. So I find it natural. Maybe I would say now something. Maybe because my attention span is not very big. I change subjects very often. So we can make something good from something bad. Instead of being just focused on one field, I always wanted to go beyond my let's say main study. I graduated in law. But law, it's not just law. It's about philosophy of law, philosophy of the state, political theory, political economy, history. So, and that, of course, immediately opens to you a very, very wide set of subjects with interest. After I graduated in Lisbon in law, I made the degrees in Geneva, in political science, international relations, European studies. And then I was always trying to understand Europe. because Portugal, by the way, it was at that time that we became members of the European Union. We applied to become a member of the European Union. So it was possible to look at one issue from a national and European and international prism at the same time. So, and also it's by definition multidisciplinary. It was not just about law, it was about the economy, about the society, about culture in the wider meaning of the word culture.
And I'm curious how throughout your career you've learned and grown. One of the challenges that we hear in a corporate environment so much is I don't actually have time to learn. I'm too busy. You were in one of the most pressured, busiest jobs, and yet you managed to be learning throughout. So how did you manage that?
I made a very good strategic decision when I was a young man, because I've chosen a subject that it can be at the same time your learning, let's say, basis, but also your professional basis. So studying European matters, I became, of course, prepared for politics and for an international and European and international role. At that time, I was not thinking I could become one day president of the European Commission. Portugal was not even a member of the European Union at that time. It was in 79, 78 that I made that. So I was 22 years old. And afterwards, I built my career, but it was, I probably could say it's serendipity. I built it as an accidental academic and an accidental politician, going from one side to the other. So when I was in your position, I went to Georgetown and I became visiting professor at Georgetown University. When I left the European Commission, I became visiting professor at Princeton University in the US. So I was going from one side to the other, but it was possible because what I've learned in politics was useful for my academic life, and what I learned in my academic life was certainly very useful for my political and professional engagements too.
So we're talking with José Manuel Barroso. José is a true embodiment of curiosity and lifelong learning, as you're hearing. His illustrious career began as an academic in Portugal, including time as a professor of law, before moving into politics and eventually becoming Prime Minister of Portugal in 2002. His journey then led him to the international stage as the President of the European Commission from 2004 to 2014. And during that time, he navigated significant events such as the adoption of the Lisbon Treaty, the 2008 financial crisis, and the European debt crisis. His post-political career has been equally impressive, with José serving as the non-executive chairman of the International Advisory Board at Goldman Sachs and taking on a role at Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, which has been responsible for vaccinating 1 billion children in some of the poorest countries around the world. Today, we'll delve into how curiosity has shaped his career and his perspectives on its role in navigating our complex world. Looking forward to continuing our enlightening conversation. So, José, how's curiosity played a role in your political career? So, particularly as your time as president of the European Commission, how did it help you navigate?
Look, namely, as president of the European Commission, it's to a large extent what I call the broader cultural role. What do I mean by cultural? In Europe, I was chairing a commission of 28 members. At that time, the UK was a member of the European Union. So when you are around the table every Wednesday in the Berlaymont building in Brussels with 27 other colleagues, with 24 or 25 official languages, you have to make an effort always of translation, not in linguistic terms, but in trying to understand the Weltanschauung, the way people see the world. It's, of course, very different from France to Germany, from Sweden to Greece, from the Netherlands to Italy. So, as a great Italian intellectual, unfortunately no longer with us, but he was, by the way, visiting once in Brussels, he said, translation is the language of Europe. So this is an example of where you have to be curious. You have to try to understand other points of view. If not, you cannot. You can be an honest broker or try to bring consensus in issues like the ones you mentioned, Simon. Now, during the financial and sovereign debt crisis, it was extremely difficult, of course, to put together. But at the end, we have done it. Those who were predicting the Grexit, Greece leaving the euro, they were wrong. Those who were predicting the collapse of the single currency were wrong. But we could do it very painfully with great efforts, but also because we tried to understand. And to understand, you have to be curious. You have to try to put yourself in the position of others. So that was, I think, very important in my my political, let's say, activity.
José, how do you maintain your curiosity, particularly, doing work that's so much in the public eye when you're faced with these sorts of challenges that you describe or setbacks?
For me, it's natural. I mean, what else can we do? You see, in life, besides the more, let's say, intimate parts from our, let's say, spiritual aspirations or concerns, besides love and friendship, what is there more important than knowledge and culture? Nothing. We have one life, at least in this planet. Apparently, we have only one life. So let's make the most of it. I only wish that we had more time, because the lifetime we have as humans is very short to try to understand everything that's going on. I was very lucky to have a career that allows me also to visit other countries. I'm, of course, unfortunately, not with enough time to understand them, but I was already 125 countries as a young deputy foreign minister, then foreign minister, but also in the European Commission. I had that opportunity. So, and this is something that is constantly fueling your curiosity and going beyond your comfort zone. First, I was extremely active in the African issues, mediating the civil wars, the conflicts in Angola and Mozambique, two former Portuguese colonies. I mean, to try to understand those countries that are so different culturally from our own. I mean, it's another way to, you have to be curious. You have to try to understand. You have to try to get more knowledge. So that was, in fact, driven by the circumstances, and I found it naturally. And in fact, I find it imperative that one tries to remain curious and to be attentive to the changes that we are going through.
As you say, José, not just culturally different, but I'm sure the places you describe in terms of leadership style and the people that you meet in positions of power and leadership are very different styles and ways of going about things. How has your exposure to this and also your own commitment to learning influenced your leadership style?
That's an interesting question, because I think, and I come back to the question put by Simon, I think that one of the most important problems we have today, at least in political leadership, is that there is no time. I was, as I told you, very young foreign minister, and at that time, the foreign ministers were members of the summit of the European Union, the European Council. We were only 12 around 12 countries. So I was at that time with Helmut Kohl in the same table as Helmut Kohl from Germany, François Mitterrand from France. I mean, even sometime with Margaret Thatcher, but then it was John Major, Jacques Delors, my predecessor at the European Commission, and many people that today people think, oh, they were great politicians. That was a golden age. Look, it was much easier, much easier. It's much tougher to be prime minister today than at that time, because there was no social media then. We were, as politicians, we were only thinking about 8 p.m. news in the television. We did not care about the rest. We had the time to write our own speeches. Today, I don't think any of these politicians has the time to write his or her own speeches. So time, the overload of the information, the pressure, the fact that today that it's much more difficult to separate internal politics from external politics, namely in Europe, it's completely impossible. I mean, European politics is internal politics, and national politics is European politics. But also with globalization or deglobalization going on, the very acute pressures we have now make time very difficult. So today, I think politicians, they read less. At least they do not read books, and which is a pity, because we need to have the perspective. And to avoid obvious mistakes, we need to compare. I hate when I listen to people say, only in Portugal this could happen, only in UK, only in France. It's not true. Or when people think, oh, this is unique. It's not unique, because it has happened before and it will happen in the future. So that's why you need comparison. You need to avoid generalizations. And that's in the media, the spin, it's social media, but also, I'm afraid, also the mainstream media, to present a story. They usually have a tendency to try to, if there is one or two victories of right-wing parties, they say, oh, there is a wave of national that is going to destroy. I mean, come on. There are specific causes for the specific issue. We should avoid abusive generalizations and simplifications. And that's what is feeding today populism. Populism In French, we say le grand simplificateur. It's the greatest way of simplification. And that's why we need politicians that are able to understand and to assume the complexity of today's life and make it as an asset and not as a problem.
So we talk about this in the book around how we completely agree with you. The world is speeding up. Technology is advancing faster than our ability as humans to be able to adapt and keep up with it. And we believe curiosity is one of the ways to sort of navigate through that. How would you suggest people cope with these changes that we see around us, the rapid change of technology with artificial intelligence and what we're seeing coming there, some of these global challenges? It's so difficult for people to navigate through this. Any suggestions, tips on how to navigate through this accelerating world and this speed of change that we see?
To try to understand, to learn, to read. I don't see a better way. I mean, I agree with you. I think we are the transformational moment. I think we are in a true technological revolution that is going to have a huge impact. It's already having an impact in production of goods and services, in global exchanges, but also in the way people live. The artificial intelligence, namely the machine learning and the so-called super intelligence, is really transformative. And I've been following that. Now since we have that ChatGPT, people are more attentive to that. But personally, I've been following that for some time now. Some of the experts on this matter speak about the new forms of artificial intelligence being as important as the Industrial Revolution, as the Enlightenment, and some even go to the point of saying as important as the discovery of the wheel of fire.
Wow.
I don't know if they are exaggerating or not, but maybe not. Maybe not. At least we have to listen to that possibility. This is going to change dramatically everything. For the good in many matters, namely on science and, for instance, medicine, health, we see extremely important developments, by the way, because when you speak about artificial intelligence, it's not just artificial intelligence. It's biosciences, biotechnology, gene editing, also linked with quantum computing. So the hyper acceleration of speed and scale will make things happen that we until now considered it science fiction. They are already happening. But also the great opportunities it opens, namely in terms of health and other issues that are for the common good. There are also dangers, of course, of personal freedom, and also the existential issue, what will be our relation with a much bigger intelligence. The reality is, okay, we can say it was created by man. Yes, but it's no longer on man's control. So there are now forms of intelligence that are much superior to the Homo sapiens intelligence. And we have to face it. So that's why it's a real existential change, and we have to try to understand what's going on. If we don't do it, we'll probably have a problem.
Jose, as someone that's familiar with negotiating complex treaties at an international level, what do you think about the conversation at the moment that's going on at a global level in terms of regulating AI? I read today that it should be treated almost in the same way as nuclear was.
Yeah, we should do it. I believe it's unavoidable. By the way, in that meeting I had, I cannot attribute because it was Chatham House rule, but there were some of the most important leaders, including business leaders and the science guys that are leading this issue. They were there and they were asking for regulation. Of course, they have to say it also because they don't want to take full responsibility, some of them, for what's going on. But I personally believe that regulation will not solve the problem because artificial intelligence is linked to defense and security and military matters. And so even if we agree, and hopefully we will, on some framework of rules globally for the use, I frankly don't think that all powers of the world will respect it completely. I think the military concerns that are now, by the way, also increasing because the geopolitical situation is getting only worse, and I believe it's going to get much worse. What happens is that they will keep on developing some forms of artificial intelligence because artificial intelligence, besides the good uses it can have, it's also a weapon, and it's an enabler of more, let's say, weapons and more military means of destruction. So that's why I'm a little bit skeptical, but that's not a reason not to do it. On the contrary, it's a reason to do it as the better we can, because we need, as much as possible, some understanding. First of all, there is not yet full understanding of what's going on, And secondly, some possibilities of moderating or at least mitigating, to be more precise, mitigating the possible negative outcomes.
I was reading an article from Ray Kurzweil last night, the futurologist, and he was making exactly that point around actually how can we pause, because you would need every country, every entity in the world to pause at the same time, and actually this is both a military and a competitive differentiator for countries, and therefore to get everyone to agree at the same time it would be very, very hard. But the danger, I guess, of not having that is everyone continues full steam ahead, and some of those negative consequences, whether that be on trust or whether that be some of the darker scenarios of a super intelligent entity from AGI and where that takes us, I guess it's an interesting dilemma of how do we get all the positives without ending up going headlong into a situation that gives us the negatives.
Look, about nuclear, you mentioned, I think it was Paul who mentioned nuclear. The reality, we were lucky because, after the tragic experience of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, nuclear power has not yet been used. But the fact that in spite of all the non-proliferation treaties, there are countries that have been developing capacity. So the possibility of an accident, the possibility of use of a nuclear, from my point of view, it's increasing every day. And by the way, some time ago, we were not listening to so many references to nuclear power in war. And now, because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that became already a topic. So I'm concerned there too. But nevertheless, to be frank, you can say that the international, let's say, nuclear frameworks and treaties have been helpful. So maybe we need something like that. But frankly, I don't think that will solve the problem, and we have to be prepared to big challenges in our relationship with these new forms of intelligence.
You mentioned the word prepare, and I think this is a very interesting thing to explore curiously, because we are at a time, even in my lifetime, where there is a huge amount of uncertainty. People, even the experts, genuinely don't know what some of the outcomes of some of the particularly technologies that we're creating are going to be. Given this, and also given the sort of geopolitical instability that you mentioned, what are some of the things that we should be preparing our children for the next generation who are going to take on these problems for us?
I think the most important one is the one you just mentioned. So, technological change in general, not specifically artificial intelligence, machine learning, but bioscience, biotechnology, quantum computing, gene editing. One of the most interesting developments is in bioscience today. It's and the genetics. And by the way, people speak less about it, but it's going on. And by the way, also possible uses in military purposes. The problem is that there is a confluence that all these matters can reinforce each other, because artificial intelligence is going to work with a much bigger speed and scale because of quantum computing, and this can also be translated in the other fields from bioscience and biotechnology. I think this is the most important challenges. We have to be prepared. Of course, there is a very existential issue: it's climate change and the impact it can have, and it's already having in our planet. But I think I do not believe on the apocalyptic theories, I have to say. I hope they are wrong, because I think part of the solution is going to be on science and technology. And I have a great faith on science and technology. So science and technology, including artificial intelligence, can help us. That does not mean that you should not take the other measures we are taking, namely in terms of mitigation and so on. And more respect for our environment first and foremost. But science and technology, I'm convinced, will bring us at least part of the solution to climate change. That's another issue. And the third issue is geopolitics. The relations between the big powers, including non-state actors globally, how we can keep some level of cooperative, let's say, framework in a very fragmented world we have now. And that I've been seeing also in my life now. I was in the commission. I had the honor, the privilege to be in all those G20 meetings that in fact started by our initiative at heads of state and heads of government level since 2008. And what I can tell is that today it's much more difficult than before. During the G20, when I was there, for instance, we were cooperating with very honestly with China. China was also supporting the European Union in face of the sovereign debt crisis, financial crisis. Today, the level of understanding is much lower. So how can we develop common public goods like, for instance, and I'm now chairman of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines, as you have mentioned, how can we keep some common commitment to global public goods, like the fight against pandemics, like the fight against climate change? This is a major issue. So geopolitics, science and technology, climate change, I would say, are the three main areas where we have to find new solutions.
You're listening to the Curious Advantage podcast, inspired by the book The Curious Advantage, written by Paul Ashcroft, Simon Brown, and Garrick Jones. Subscribe to the podcast today.
One of the things we talk about how to be successfully curious is about creativity and bringing creativity into problem solving, into exploring new things. Could you tell us a story perhaps about how you brought two different ideas together from any of the many different domains you've worked in to approach something in a new way?
Yes, but before doing that, I'm going to mention how could you keep this? And now I'm going to give you a secret, and I think it's probably helpful for young people that can be listening to us. When I was 22 years, I went to Geneva. I was studying my postgraduate studies, and afterwards I became teaching assistant. And there was a book I read called The Sociological Imagination of Wright Mills. Wright Mills was a great American sociologist, a radical guy. And yes, in that book, he has something like advice to a young student on social sciences. And the first thing he says is, keep an intellectual diary. So since I was 22 years old, I keep an intellectual diary. In fact, it's here. So where I take notes of everything. Not only I'm not a very organized person, so instead of keeping different files, this is all I have on a chronological order. So now already my conversation with you, it's already here in today's entry, but from political meetings to all the operas I've listened, the movies I've watched, the books I've read, all of them are here. So I have more than 400 of these notebooks.
Do you keep them throughout the day, or do you fill them in at the end of the day? How do you work with it?
Usually very early in the morning. So I write about, I take notes for instance, today my agenda is here, what I'm going to do. So I'm in London now, I'm going to Lisbon in the flight at 7:50. So, and also, I have my plan for today, and then tomorrow at 5 o'clock, 6 in the morning, I take notes of the previous day, and not only professional, but by the way, most of it is not professional. It's about culture, about books I read, about yesterday I went, for instance, to the Valkyrie from a great opera here in the Regent's Opera, an alternative opera, by the way, here in London, great, from Wagner, 5 hours of Wagner, great experience, I have to tell you. So this is for me, this is my gold mine of information. For me, this is the most important thing I have in my life. That is my notebooks, because I can go back. At least I go twice a year, always on holidays in summer, and at the end of the year, to make a kind of a bilan and to make some perspectives, linking the issues. And now I'm answering your second part of your question about creativity. The key to creativity is to link to things that are not obvious. That is the link to creativity. And that's also a great way of problem solving. Just to give you an example in political life, sometimes, and in European Union, I have that experience. Sometimes, when you have a problem, the best way to solve it is to enlarge it. Why? Because in European Union, that's certainly the case. Why? Because if you enlarge the problem, you have more stakeholders interested in its resolution, more commitment, and also there are more trade-offs. An example. Climate change, precisely. When I was president of the commission, we presented this most ambitious program to fight climate change. It was called 2020. But let me be honest with you. The member states, most of them were not at all enthusiastic about it. Some of them were really opposing it. They did not want to have binding targets limiting their possibilities of emissions because of their industry. So how could we solve it? It was not just the problem of climate change. environmental problem. It was an issue of energy security. And so our package was called Climate Change and Energy Security, because we were giving some of, for instance, our new member states, Central Eastern European countries, telling them, look, you should be less dependent on, already at that time, on gas from Russia. It's important that you get finance for reverse flows, for LNG terminals, and so on and so forth. And that's when it started, by the way. So if it was just a green package against climate change, it would not be adopted. But since it was a package of energy security and climate change, it could be adopted. So this is an example of linking two apparently different topics, but for a solution.
I love that as well. And it seems a bit counterintuitive that to solve a problem, you actually make it bigger. But I think that's it's a nice way to think about it. You get more people involved, and it's logical then that it gets more focus. So I'd like to dive a little bit into your role in academia. So you started life early on in academia, and now you're a fellow at Holt EF. You're chair of their advisory council, where I have the honour of supporting you as vice chair. We have a focus there on creating change makers and a big emphasis as well on curiosity. So where do you see education and higher education go in the future? We've talked a little bit about advice for young people, but what do you see the role of education and higher education in the future?
Look, as I told you, I have a real passion for education. By the way, I'm delighted that I have now this role, and that, Simon, you are also in the same advisory board I am. So I think it's and by the way, just recently, I'm not going to give a great secret, to reveal a great secret. We had a meeting precisely to think about these matters. How can we now respond to these new challenges? And in fact, it's a problem today because there is so much information. How can we deal with this very big amount of information? There was a professor I had in the US who told me, and by the way, he said it public, not only, knowledge is the process by which you delete useless information. And that's a part of the problem, because what we need now, to some extent, is curators. We had curators in galleries of art, in museums, but probably don't have yet sufficiently curatorial capacity for all these changes. Because
I love that. That's the third of our 7 Cs in our 7C model about curation. So you're preaching to the converted with curation.
Okay. In that case, so maybe we are right. And that is the point, because precisely this, because the experts, and that's good, we need those experts, and I can only, but they are working sometimes on their own silos. So how can we link, let's say, the technical expertise of someone with working in artificial intelligence, for instance, we have mentioned, to a more philosophical or a more sociological or even political approach? That's a challenge. That's very complex. So and so that's why, for instance, now in the boards I've been, and also in the private sector, now they are attentive to this fact that they need, first, we don't need to have in all boards a technological expert, but we need to have people that at least understand that language and that are able to put the right questions on that matter. So, and this is for me a very difficult issue, how we can combine the technical expertise that is more required, even more required now, with some broader cultural, let's say, perspective. And that's why I insist very much on the word culture. We need people that are cultivated. And by the way, and it's part of the curiosity agenda and your curious advantage point. Because if you are not curious, you are going to be only on your field, and you are not have the openness to be attentive to what's going on outside of your comfort zone. This is the real issue now. And also but globally, I think there are great opportunities. Just to give an example, Africa is really a continent with a great future. Not only it's the more dynamic in terms of demographics, but the creativity I found in Africa, because they had to find, because of some structural problems of poverty there, they had to find some innovative ways, and they have great humor. They have great imagination. So there are a lot of intellectual resources there that the potential has not yet been completely freed. So I hope that one of the, for instance, how can we have universities linking what we do in the more advanced universities, let's say in Europe and the US, and North America. What can we do to link with them? That's, I think, a very important, because the talent pool there, it's huge, and the possibilities to bring them are also very, very important. That's just an example of what we can do to foster, let's say, more effective global education.
Jose, I want to ask you about your own personal curiosity, and I'm sort of a little bit want to dive into the mind of your intellectual diary there. What are you personally curious about? And also, if I could ask, how do you define curiosity?
Well, starting with the second, curiosity, it comes from Latin curiositas, and it's the willingness to understand and to learn, and the openness. I think the more important thing is openness, to be open. And that's, by the way, the advice I've been giving to my children and now already grandchildren. Because there are two possibilities in life. One is to go our way, looking to the floor, or just focus on what. Another thing is to see around, try to look around. The possibilities are immense. So I like the concept, by the way, of serendipity, because we can create conditions for serendipity. Serendipity, it's not just by chance. We can create conditions where happy coincidences happen. So that, ideally, we should have a machine for serendipity. By the way, I think partly the artificial intelligence is providing that, because it's possible to create more connections that are not obvious just on our normal life. So this is, I think, the more important issue is openness to what's going on, and so that we can see the opportunities in situations that are sometimes very, very difficult and sometimes even very painful. I don't know if I answered your question, but basically the idea is to keep your mind open, to keep your options open. That's what I've done in my life. I would not like to be in a position where I can only do politics, I can only do the private sector, or I can only do... No, keep your options open. But for that, one strategy possible, but it came to me not as a strategy, I have to be honest. I did not one day say, I'm going to do this, this, and this. No, we cannot. We usually, I think we cannot define ex ante everything we are going to do in life. I don't think, we can. What is important is to know the direction of travel. So what I've decided intuitively, maybe, was to be in a sector where I could be in my own country, Portugal, a country I love, but most of my adult life I spent outside, from Geneva in Switzerland to Brussels, to UK, to the United States. So most of my adult life was outside. So I'm not bound to be in one country. I can go in another country if I want. I'm not bound to be in one field. I can go to other fields as well. So to be free, at the end of the day, it comes to freedom. And that's probably because when I was a young man, I was living under the dictatorship. And so the possibilities of what I'm telling you, I've written this when I was 13 years old. There was an essay, a competition for essay, and I won the prize with an essay called "The School as a Way of Your Self Realization and Social Promotion." Social promotion, because of course, in a country that it is relatively poor, or it was today, it's much better. But Portugal of the 70s was huge social problems. How could you make progress? Through education. Education is, in spite of its all difficulties and all inequalities that remain, is the biggest social elevator still today. So, and that's why I believe it's worthwhile investing in education. It's not an expenditure; it's an investment that has by the way, an economic rationale, but also basically a human motivation. Because when we are investing in education, we are contributing to the self-fulfillment, to the improvement of our lives, of our people, of our young people.
I also am fascinated about what you're saying in terms of, you've circled right back from, you started the conversation with us about freedom and about being open. And in your career, you've kept that going. But I think that takes bravery and courage as well. What would you say to people who may be facing in their own context, in any case, difficult situations? What would you say to them about how to be open, how to be curious?
Look, frankly, I did not. You're very kind in your remarks, Paul, but I did not. I don't think it required on my side special courage. I mean, maybe before the revolution, yes, because at that time, to be against the regime, you were going through some risks. But afterwards, I was lucky. My mother was teacher, high school teacher of physics. She was always motivating me. So I think the family. That's why it's important what we do with our children. The family, and there are, as you know, studies about this. For instance, migration communities, the ones who do better. Usually, we see those who are doing better are the ones who have a more supporting family in terms of studies and learning. So it's very, very important. Besides the public or private school, the support you have from your immediate, let's say, milieu, namely your family. So I was not specially courageous. I was lucky also, and I was in the middle class level, so access to some information, and not rich, but I mean with a relatively comfortable life. So, but yes, in some people in our world, including in most developed societies, they have huge problems. Problems not only about economic, social problems, injustice that continues to go on, but also sometimes problems. How can I put them? Psychological problems. So the lives that are broken, depression. By the way, that's why I believe the issue of mental health is extremely important. And when I was in the Commission, I launched at that time the first network of good practice about mental health. By the way, some governments said they were against because they said this is not the business of the European Union, it's a national issue. But I think why not to create a network of good practices? Because mental health at that time, people were almost afraid to speak about it. So, and it's very important. Now, precisely what I think is that knowledge and art, and not only art, we have not spoken about art today, but art also is great as a therapy. And so people, through knowledge and through art, that can help people also to become happier, or at least to face some psychological situation of stress and even sometimes mental problems. So I think this is why it is important to have a comprehensive look, a holistic look at these matters in a way that we can see this once again as an opportunity. Coming back to our major topic, education, learning, curiosity, it's a way of solving problems. And I strongly advise people to go on this path.
Fantastic. So, José, we're coming towards the end of our time. We've had a rich conversation. So just to summarize some of the things we've covered from your early life, where there was no freedom of expression, through to how it was reading the forbidden fruit that was one of the drivers for your curiosity, how you've been naturally curious throughout your career, and how maybe your short attention span has actually helped you to learn across many subjects along the way. Liked how you talked about the effort of translation in understanding the ways of others, that translation is the language of Europe, and therefore we have to be curious to understand across different nationalities. Some of your comments around being what's more important than culture and knowledge, and how you personally visited 125 countries throughout your lifetime, that you find it imperative to remain curious. Talked a bit onto AI and how some of the things that would seem sci-fi are actually already happening, some of the importance of regulation and some of the challenges that we have along the way with that. Talked about how we could prepare our children, so in technology in general, in bioscience, in understanding climate change, in geopolitics, and then dived into some of the things since you'd finished in politics, so the Gavi Vaccines Alliance, stepping into the shoes of Nelson Mandela, and also the importance of actually personal satisfaction and that diversity of experiences. Great advice around keeping an intellectual diary. I'll be intrigued whether those diaries one day go into an AI and we end up with an AI replica of José based upon all of your life's thoughts. We'll see if that comes one day. How the key to creativity of linking two things that aren't obvious, and the counterintuitive advice around actually to solve a problem, maybe we need to make it bigger. So rich conversation, covered all manner of topics. If there's one thing for our listeners to take away from all of that, one key message, what would that be, José?
In English, I would say, never lose your enthusiasm even when you lose your illusions. And I think that's very important, enthusiasm. So when we are young, and when I was young, I was very radical. I wanted to change dramatically everything in society. Of course, with age, we understand that probably reform is better than revolution. So we lose some of our youth illusions of changing everything and making. But what is important is when we lose those illusions, that we don't become cynical. The cynics are not always right. Just to give an example, when I was in foreign policy, Portugal was supporting the independence, the self-determination of East Timor, a small country that was under foreign occupation. Everybody, all the realpolitik, our partners in Europe United said, it's impossible. You will never get it. It's done. It became the first independent country of the 21st century because of negotiations, because also evolution of the other country. So, and I use that example to say that sometimes realpolitik is not realistic. Sometimes, and the cynics are not always right. So, and this is why it's important that even when you lose your illusions and you are growing up, we keep your enthusiasm for life. So that's why these matters of learning should not be boring, should be something that gives us satisfaction, as Rolling Stones will say. Okay.
Fantastic. So never lose your enthusiasm, even when you lose your illusions.
Voila, that's it.
You've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. This series is about how individuals and organizations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and businesses, especially in the context of our new digital reality. The Curious Advantage book is available on Amazon worldwide. Order your physical, digital, or audio book copy now to further explore the 7 C's model for being more curious. We're curious to hear from you. We encourage you to write a review for the podcast on your preferred channel and join the conversation. Join today at #CuriousAdvantage, subscribe, and keep exploring curiously. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast.
The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon.
Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Paolinelis and John McGinty and edited by Jill Damatak-Futter.